Welcome to the Blue Oasis podcast. This is the podcast for finding peace and prosperity in your life, learning the history of hobbies, as well as making a little side hustle out of your hobbies. If you want to find balance in your life and find peace, this is your show. Get ready. You're listening to the Blue Oasis podcast. I am your host, Adam Rothstein. All right, let's get to the show. All right, everyone, welcome back to the Blue Oasis podcast. I know I'm not in. I know I don't have the a guest on with me today, but I did want to talk about freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom of religion, the First Amendment. Our hobbies require the First Amendment because sometimes what we do can be perceived as controversial. Tattoos, woodworking, maybe you practice a certain religion. You might have this gothic thing or whatever you get from Spencer's or whatever of those weird outlets you do, but there are definitely controversial things, nose rings, maybe you like to drink raw milk. I don't know. But the thing is that you have a right to expression. You have the right to say and express yourself in very disgusting manners, in very controversial manners, more importantly. The American flag can be burned. And you may be like, Adam, that's a disgrace. That shouldn't be a part of the First Amendment. No, and I'll disagree with you right there. I'll stop you right there and say, yes, you should have the right to burn the American flag. And here's the reason. As long as you are not harming anyone else with that, you have bought it from a store and you're not endangering anyone and you are in control of the flame. It's not getting out of control. You have a right to burn that flag. Absolutely. And you should not go to prison for it. That is it's stupid to do, but the reason why people do that is to protest wars and protest things that the American government doesn't that the American government does at certain times, and or something very controversial to that effect that a person might have issues with their government. Let's just say it, keep it like that. A person may have issues with their government so much that they are willing to burn their flag of nationality. So that is why it should be legal. Not the best. Didn't get that out right at first. But continuing on, our hobbies, they require the right to peaceably assemble, right? Some hobbies are religious based, so freedom of religion. You need a required press. You need the right to express yourself, the right to speak freely, and the right to petition your government for redress of grievances. It's all encompassed in the First Amendment. It is the most important thing. And the reason why our founders wrote this down is because maybe it was implied back then that, yeah, we get to do and say controversial things back in the 1700s, but they insisted on it that this principle would remain preserved in the Constitution so all generations could speak out freely and not be in fear of their government. That's why we have wrote this down. Now, there are definitely people that don't like the First Amendment and want to abolish it, obviously, but To that I say screw them. The reason why you should want the First Amendment is to defend your hobby. You want the right to express yourself. You want some of your hobbies are controversial. Yes, I know, but let's take an example. Let's take an example. I have this book, let's see, that was written by John Grisham. Not sure if you can see it well. I'm kind of blurring it out, but yeah, there you go. It's a John Grisham book right there. Um, and we write books. I've written books. Some of you've written books. And if the government can come in and say, "Hey, don't like what you're doing, don't like what you're writing, can't allow this," you might be spreading disinformation or something like that. That might be crazy or misinformation. Um, and therefore, so since you can't spread what we decide what they consider to be misinformation, you know, you're automatically censored. But who watches the Watchmen, essentially? Who watches the Watchmen? If they say, oh, that's misinformation, but what if it's true? We thought Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. Didn't affect, that was a lie, and we went into Iraq and we killed nearly 2 million people. So that's a thing. Now, I don't normally get political on the show, and I really don't want to, but I think I have to because you know I do see that the First Amendment is under attack. I mean because you have a lot of corporate conglomerates in bed with lobbyists and government officials who pressure them to allow certain speech. You know, and certain accounts are taken down, and there are certain journalists that are targeted and all that unfortunate and all that. And I don't want to see that. You have the right to say controversial things, report the news, very controversial stuff, and it doesn't matter where and if it's the truth, it doesn't matter where it comes from. These are important principles that we need to uphold. And just by doing your hobby, inviting people and letting them speak freely, letting them express themselves, and creating art and woodworking and painting and all this stuff that is built into our culture has made the world better. And it's because of the First Amendment. It's because of the First Amendment that we get to speak freely on the internet. You know, it's it's enshrined in our Constitution for a reason because this is the foundation of America. And it should be the foundation of the world. All citizens should be able to speak freely without, punishment from their government. And and if you disagree with me, I really want to know why you disagree with me on this. It needs to be remembered. You know, I think there was some class I was in that you had to remember certain things of the preamble or something, but maybe you should remember the principles of the Constitution, or well, and yes, and the First Amendment too. You know, First Amendment mainly, but yes, also the principles of the Constitution. Absolutely. Um, I want this podcast to reach as many people as possible. Now, some some of you might actually be in France. Some of you are Canadians. Some of you are in Mexico or in Great Britain, or even found someone from Spain and Russia, oddly enough. But that was before the I was looking at my metrics, but that was before the Ukraine war happened. So I don't know if any Russians are still listening to me at this moment, or if it was just your VPN that did that. But I have had English people um listening. I've had English people on this podcast, and and I and and I do want to connect with people. That's why I created this podcast. It is, now some of your countries don't have the First Amendment. You should, I would say to that, enshrine it in your law. Any politician that doesn't support this, you should vote him out of office, get him out of there, and don't let them say, oh no, you can't say hate speech or anything. And this is another issue that has led to censorship. Hate speech. Okay, well, you can't say anything hateful. Well, I hate you, sort of thing. I don't like you, sort of thing. And you can't say stuff that, oh, that could be deemed triggering, even though I hate that and that term, because I mean, to be triggered, I mean, you know, usually I think of something that could be an actual physical response, not necessarily an emotional response. That's something else. Um, you can't discriminate, it's a form of discrimination to attack someone that's marginalized. But now I don't want to say anything bad about people. I think the majority of people are good, but you need to let people say the hateful and the hurtful things because you know, that is how we improve. We can attack their ideas with words. Okay. And it is the freedom of speech that has led us to a better society for that. I mean, you want to know something? Here's a little thing. Back in the 40s, there were a bunch of Ku Klux Klan members in the United States, and it was growing. And I think this was before we entered World War II. Um, and Superman was a part of that of shutting it down. And the creator of DC Comics or whatever comic or the creator of Superman comics, made a comic strip of him, uh, of Superman beating up white nationalists, and they and white nationalists didn't like it. They definitely targeted people that liked Superman, and we look at Superman now as like the golden superhero. Look at him now. But back then, it was a very important thing that he did because, it was for, a brighter America, or for a better America. That was his thing. And the creator of Superman comics understood that, it's not, you should not discriminate against anyone based on the color of their skin. So oddly enough, we have Superman and well, the creator of Superman to thank for helping get rid of this. And there were some radio broadcasts, I think, of Superman doing it, and they looked at each other, and it's like, you believe that you're superior based on the race of your own skin? And I mean, and this did carry over into the early 70s, and then you get to the movie Remember the Titans. You get to the like 1972. We're putting guys on the moon at the time, and and then and there's still things, and there's still discriminations, and you still have black high schoolers finally getting into the white schools, and then the whole set of Remember the Titans. That story then takes place in, I think, 1972, and then after that, they sort of like get it together. You know, the boys get along and they play football and they actually beat everyone they face in in crushing fashion. Even though the movie made it seem a lot more closer than it actually was at the time. So that movie definitely encapsulated what went down in 1972 in Virginia. But then you go north into Maryland, like 40 miles, and they've had it for a while because Maryland was one of the first slave states to give it up back at the back at the time. It was you know, I think it was like 1860. Lincoln did something back then, and then Maryland just quit being a slave state after 1860. Not sure exactly what he did, but he did do that. The let's see. Um, so we get all of that. So that is one of the benefits of doing that too. Um, and and also with books, with sharing with CDs and DVDs and all that stuff back in the 2000s, you were able to protest against the Iraq War. The um, one thing I hate about um, during the early 2000s were the free speech zones too. And you couldn't go get too close to a Bush rally, because if you did, you got arrested. And George W. Bush should be ashamed of himself for that. Personally, I don't. He really should. You know, you know, freedom of speech also requires that you get to protest someone in public, and it doesn't require the distance, and the distance shouldn't matter as long as you don't commit battery or you assault anyone. You should be able to speak your mind. We peaceably assemble. We say you can yell, you can say controversial shit. Um, I tried to stop myself there, so there goes the E. You can say controversial shit. Um, you can also um, and you can yell at someone and give them the finger. That is protected speech, and it should be. And 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 I think George Bush deserves to be shamed. I do. This is he he helped lead us into a war, and he continued it. He didn't care about that. All it was a money laundering operation for the military industrial complex. That's it. And he you know and you get and as part of the First Amendment, it shouldn't matter where you protest. As long as you're out in public or in your private room, or in your private bedroom or your house, you should be able to write articles line and criticize people, whether that's the government, some corporation, or some schmuck on YouTube or whatever. You need to be able to do that. I mean, it, we also don't, you know, if you take away the First Amendment, how are you supposed to run a functioning society? In my mind, I don't know how you do that because if you can't say something certain, you know, it's very likely that violence will boil over and become a controversy. Controversy. Um, yeah. Or okay. Sticking with free speech zones, we actually had a free speech zone at Towson University called Freedom Square, oddly enough, and you could only really protest anything in that specific section. You couldn't really go and protest at the business school. You couldn't really do the um you couldn't protest, at the liberal arts hall or Millennium Hall, or whatever we called it back then, or at the you know, at the or at the computer science place, or in the labs. Well, no, not in the labs themselves, but actually in the building. You know, I get it. You're disturbing. the piece, but as long as classes aren't there, you should absolutely be able to do so. To do that, you should be able to protest outside the buildings, absolutely. I mean, keep it as expansive as possible. But having one specific area to protest at a college, for example, is just mind-boggling stupid. You need to be able to protest everywhere you can. Now, is it disruptive in a library? Yes. And then you ask them to leave after that. Absolutely. Now it's not productive to protest and yell in a library, and you're going to lose whatever message you're trying to get across. But you need more than one place to protest, clearly, on a college campus. And you need to be able to protest the president when he's doing a rally, when he or she is doing a rally. You know, I mean, I don't know what's going to happen in the election. I don't. Um, but but whoever's the president, you need to be able to speak out, obviously. And it doesn't matter what side wins, you need to be able to speak out against the president, your government, and say controversial stuff. And even still, that includes misinformation or disinformation. Because, you know, it's not the government's place to determine what's true or not. I mean, I mean, maybe it's experts. You could say that scientists have, for example, they have expertise in a field, and yes, they'll come to the right conclusion. But you're even allowed to believe that creationism is real, and there are creationist videos on YouTube, you know, but they're wrong for that. That you're not created from, Eve was not created from a rib and with like magical powers and all that stuff. And no, I don't believe that. But yet you have a right to. You have a right to be a flat earther. I mean, you can live in denial and be foolish too. You absolutely have that right. And you should be able to report on that too. But guess what you can counter that with? More speech. And and freedom of speech, the best ideas can win out. Um, and you can, but most of the time, because most of the time the good ideas will win out, but sometimes the bad ideas do win out. I mean, we once thought, to duck and cover under a desk, that was stupid. I don't know how you were supposed to survive that. You know, nukes coming into wherever, and you are under your seat. Yeah, that'll protect you for about 0.02 seconds. Um, but you're still gonna die in a nuclear explosion. That it didn't make any sense back then. The To finish this off, um, freedom of speech needs to be as expansive as possible. You need to be able to protest, you know, in 99% of public places. I get that the library, you're not going to, I mean, you're free to do that, but you shouldn't be arrested. You should be asked removed. And then if you don't remove yourself, trespassing, all that stuff, disrupting the peace. I get it. Um, but something else you can add to that too. You can actually hand out flyers at the library and just be quiet. You can actually walk around with your posters and all that, and you should be free to do that. Absolutely. But you can't, I don't think you should be able to yell necessarily in libraries or, I mean, yes, you should be able to yell and not go to prison, but of course you're going to be asked to leave. And it's like, librarians going to be all that stuff. But you absolutely need to be able to protest in a library and just hand out flyers and be free to do so. Always, you know, get your message across, eh, effectively to persuade people. Absolutely. 99% of places out in the public, you should be able to have whatever speech you want. And I say 99% because, there may be, there might be an emergency such as a fire or pipe bursts in a building and you need to evacuate. That's the sort of thing that I'm talking about. You can't go in to a crime scene sort of thing. I get that. But overall, freedom of speech needs to be as expansive as possible. We need to fight against censorship and everything else. You know, I have my problems with people on both the right and the left. Okay. I'm I'm not the biggest fan of Twitter. I can't even reach people that way effectively anymore. But I'd like to do email. I'd like to do this podcast and everything, but you should be able to speak your mind and reach people in whatever way you want. That's something that you should believe in. Speak your mind and reach, and you get to go wherever you want. For the most part, aside from, you get to be out in public and say what you want in the most controversial manner you possibly can. And but if the message fails to get across to people, that is on you. So be persuasive, be effective in your speech, and you will change the world. All right, everyone. Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you would like to support me, please check out an audiobook of mine. Check it out. It's available on Spotify. You can also search it out on whatever audiobook app you have. It's the best way to support the show. Also sign up for the email and share this episode with a friend. And with that being said, take care.